For over a decade, Test Sessions has been our way of dissecting a bunch of bikes from a specific category. It's been a great format as it allows the cream to rise at the top and helps riders discover which bike is right for them. And this got us thinking, why not apply Test Sessions to components? We wrangled together 7 high-end enduro forks and headed to Mountain Creek Bike Park in New Jersey for a week of twisting knobs and eating compressions for breakfast to see what separates the best forks in 2024. Here we go, Vital's Enduro Fork Test Sessions.
So, hidden all around here are little treats and treasures. So this one out here on twist, there's a little hole in the bottom of this tree right here. Ooh. Stick your hand in. Welcome to New Jersey.
As enduro bikes have progressed into their current state, they've slowly morphed into mini downhill bikes. They can still pedal decently well, but descending performance reigns supreme over factors like weight and versatility. Modern enduro forks mimic this progression as they've consistently grown burlier with time, featuring larger diameter stanchions, stiffer chassis, more travel, and internal hardware similar to what brands spec in their downhill forks. It's a welcomed evolution to match the speed and aggression that enduro bikes promote. We tested forks from Fox, RockShox, Öhlins, Formula, DVO, XFusion, and SR Suntour. All forks are the highest model offered by each manufacturer and have 170 or 180 millimeters of travel. Most featured 38 millimeter stanchions, which have become the most popular tube diameter for long travel enduro forks thanks to the balance of weight and stiffness they provide. However, the test has an outlier in the form of Formula's Belva fork with its 35 millimeter stanchions. The Belva is also the only dual crown fork in the test, with all other models utilizing a traditional single crown architecture. All forks use an air spring instead of a coil and feature some way to adjust the spring curve, whether that be volume reducers or in the case of Öhlins RFX 38, a secondary ramp-up chamber. On the damper side, we see a mixture of cartridge, bladder, and spring-backed IFP designs. Regardless of the damper guts, riders have a combination of high and low speed compression and rebound damping external adjustments. So what makes a fork a strong performer and cut out for the intensity of enduro riding? Here is the judging criteria that we focused on. Support and stability. How well does the fork maintain a comfortable and confident ride height through deep, fast compressions? Does it avoid diving without feeling harsh? Can it handle successive hits and remain composed? Tunability. Analyzing the usability of external adjustments and the ease at which an ideal setup can be achieved. Comfort. Analyzing small bump compliance and vibration damping through high-frequency compressions, as well as chassis flex and deflection during large, high-speed impacts. And finally, traction. How well does the fork allow the front wheel to maintain contact with the ground, providing control and grip across various surfaces? To maintain a high degree of puzzling and fork smashing, testing was handled by Vital Tech editor Johnny Simonetti, returning Test Sessions rider Dennis Urashek, and myself, tech editor Jason Schroeder. We started with each manufacturer's recommended settings and then made changes based on comfort, rider preference, and testing conditions. Each of us has a different riding style that translates to different preferences when it comes to fork setup. Johnny is tall and tends to tower over the front of his bike, making him enjoy a more supportive air spring and compression damping. Dennis has a neutral, aggressive style that's complemented by a fork that's supple on the hands but ramps up fast. And I ride fairly upright and rearward, and I like when my fork recovers fast and maintains a consistent ride height while still offering a solid platform to push against. We tested each fork on the same 4 trails at Mountain Creek Bike Park for the best apples-to-apples comparison. In case you're unaware, Mountain Creek is one of the most popular bike parks on the East Coast, and they are well known for their impressive variety of trails, featuring a mix of rough, unrelenting rock gardens, high-speed chunder, technical route sections, and flowy jump lines with ripping berms. With a short lift ride that allowed us to knock out multiple runs per hour and accommodations conveniently located at the base, it was a perfect location to test 7 forks on proper terrain. All right, let's not waste any time, kicking things off with our thoughts on DVO's Onyx 38 fork. The Onyx D138 is the latest fork to materialize from the minds of longtime suspension gurus DVO. With a storied history of developing high-end forks and shocks, DVO's first dip into the 38mm chassis realm was executed with methodical observation and intention. It's not just a souped-up version of their popular Diamond Trail fork or a variant of their burly Onyx DC downhill fork. The Onyx 38 represents a new era for DVO of creating purpose-designed forks from the ground up. Beginning at the CSU, an all-new crown uses thicker arms with a dual hollow bore design to improve strength and stiffness while keeping weight within reason. The crown also has an oversized race platform to stabilize the steer tube during high-load impacts. The arch was intentionally reinforced and relieved in certain areas to provide predictable handling without causing deflection or harshness. As forces increase through the arch, it becomes stiffer, helping remain compliant and comfortable under small loads and supportive and controlled during high-force impacts. Extra long bushing overlap within the lowers further reduces flex and the amount of damping force needed because there is less binding as the stanchions cycle through the lowers. Overall, DVO feels the Onyx 38 offers the best combination of stiffness and compliance, predictability, direct steering, and comfort. Inside the Onyx 38 is the latest version of DVO's D1 damper. It uses their exclusive compression bladder system that is now 30% larger than before to increase off-the-top sensitivity and consistency. A new high-flow compression circuit provides support and damping through the middle portion of the stroke, but allows for easier compression during fast impacts. There is also a new high-flow rebound circuit to improve the damper's response time during high-speed impacts. Combined, these updates are intended to create supportive damping during the majority of the stroke without any unwanted compression harshness or packing during big impacts. External adjustments include high and low-speed compression and low-speed rebound. DVO aimed to widen the range of adjustability to accommodate more riders. This allows those seeking comfort or those riding hard and wanting support to arrive at a dialed setup. There is an extensive setup guide on DVO's website with recommended settings based on rider weight or air pressure, which is what we used for our initial setup. The D1 damper is paired with DVO's new SL Superlight air spring. Unlike the OTT air spring found in DVO's other models, which uses an externally adjustable negative spring, the SL uses a familiar dual air chamber design. This helps keep fork weight down and allows for a broader range of rider weights to achieve a proper setup. DVO says the SL air spring provides great small bump sensitivity with no mid-stroke hammock, while ending stroke progression can be tuned via volume reducers. Final fork details include a floating axle and a removable integrated fender. The Onyx D138 is available in green, gray, or black with travel options of 160, 170, and 180 millimeters. It is only compatible with a 29-inch wheel and has a 44mm offset with a 203mm brake mount. We tested the gray colorway with 170 millimeters of travel that retails for $1,150 and weighed in at 2,616 grams. This landed the Onyx 38 at the top as the heaviest in the test and around mid-pack when it comes to price. With big promises of next-level chassis performance and steering response, we were all excited to see if the Onyx 38 would outshine the bigger OEM competitors.
Oh, I didn't see you come in. Welcome back to Vital Test Sessions. Yeah, so setting up the fork wasn't the most straightforward. We took DVO's recommended settings, which are super in-depth. I think they do a really good job of establishing a baseline for people to start at, but the damper in our fork ended up with roughly 8 to 10 more clicks than what is listed, so we kind of struggled with finding where the middle actually was. We weren't sure where the extra 10 clicks were, if it was 5 on one end or the other, or if they were all on the open end or the closed end, but we kind of had a bit of trial and error on trail just getting it to a place that was happy.
So I had an interesting path getting the DVO's new Onyx 38 set up. I started with the recommended settings, which was more reliant on the damper for support, running more compression, or with their recommended air pressure, and found that I was just sitting too low in the stroke to begin with, just sitting too low deep in the travel. And the fork was bouncing more over high-speed square edge impacts than I wanted. It wasn't absorbing that impact. I ended up going maybe like a more traditional route for me, which was taking out all the compression. I added a volume reducer, added more pressure, and that helped the fork tremendously. Kept the fork riding more consistent ride height, wasn't cycling through its travel as much, and it also took the edge off of square edge hits way better. And overall, I just had a lot less feedback from those first few initial runs. So if I was going to get this fork or someone's getting this fork, I would start that route, get your pressure set to the amount of support you're looking for out of the fork, and leave your compression open, and then start adding compression damping where you see fit. Once I had the fork in a good place and felt like my setup was good, the Onyx just performed decent kind of across the board. Didn't stand out in any real particular way to me. It had decent support, it had decent traction and grip, maintained a decent consistent ride height through the rock gardens we rode. Just kind of across the board, it did everything well, but there wasn't one particular part of the trails we rode that it rose above the other forks to me.
On some of the bigger compressions, it was very stable. And even in like the smaller compressions that like are just kind of awkward in the rock gardens, it went all the way through its travel, but it didn't like buck you funny or like try and kick out on you. It was just very consistent. So overall, I thought the fork was pretty rad.
What stood out on trail to me was just the super light off the top sensitivity. It was pretty sweet for the flatter terrain that was rough, but I found that the fork just sat into its travel a little bit too easily. And while the damper did have a good amount of support, because of that super light feeling, it kind of just sat in a wall of support most of the time. So one thing that was important with this was, I think, going up in air pressure. That seemed to help quite a bit. Just keeping the fork kind of in the little, supple window sensitivity. And then with the supportive feeling out of the damper, it was pretty good through the heavier compressions and successive hits. One thing I wish it had was a high speed adjustment for the rebound, because with that higher pressure, when you would get through the travel, it would rebound pretty rapidly deep in the travel. So overall, it was definitely more comfortable on flatter terrain, and I think it offers great traction, but just because of how soft it was, it kind of suffered with the overall comfort.
Yeah, it was just a fork that I knew what it was going to do in every situation, which brings a lot of confidence, but at the same time, maybe left some performance or ride feel to be desired. I think the least favorite thing about this fork to me was that I found the chassis to be pretty stiff. I felt way more percent of the bumps I was hitting compared to some of the other forks we tested, and that just led to more hand fatigue, more arm fatigue, especially later in the day. I think that could be solved a bit more if I were to continue riding this fork. I would keep going down that route of adding pressure, backing off compression to allow the fork to just move more freely, and then rely on that air spring to give me the support I desire. One last thing that I do think is cool is that you do get a fender with this fork, which can't be said about most of the forks we tested. You can buy one separately, but this one at least comes with it, and it looks pretty cool. Up next, we have SR Suntour's Durolux 38. Steadily improving their platform year after year, the latest offerings from SR Suntour look to be on par with some of the other high-end offerings on the market, but at a lower price point. Updated for 2025, the Durolux 38 is no exception, and the robust chassis has undergone a few refinements over its predecessor. The goal of the latest model is to offer uncompromised control and stiffness, and SR Suntour has achieved this by creating a stiff chassis with a damper that provides a useful range of adjustment. Built to handle the most aggressive applications, the construction of the Durolux reflects these intentions. The chassis now sits with a 6mm wider stance between stanchions than before. The upper crown assembly consists of a tapered steer tube and hollow crown butting up to 38mm stanchions to create a rigid foundation for steering precision that shaves as many grams as possible. Pressed into the lower legs are a set of SKF dust wipers to minimize as much friction as possible, and just below them sits a set of ports on the back side with set screws for pressure equalization. Fender mounting bolts are also found on the back side of the arch, and the fender, included with the fork, creates a seamless and sleek look when mounted. A standard threaded 15mm axle holds the wheel snug in the dropouts, and a 203mm post mount handles the brake interface. With several iterations since the inception of the Durolux, the EQ equalizer airspring system denotes a negative chamber inside, which equalizes on its own relative to the positive chamber. It is a standard construction airspring running on the inner wall of the upper tube with a transfer port for negative chamber equalization. Spring curve adjustment is possible by adding or removing volume spacers from the positive chamber. The spacers are made of rubber, unlike most volume reducers on the market, making them a bit easier to add or remove from the air spring top cap. The all-new RC Plus damper, which has been in development over the last 4 years, minimizes external adjustments for the simplest setup procedure possible. After realizing high-speed compression could be preset to where most riders would prefer it anyways, SR Suntour chose to ditch the high-speed adjustment altogether. The external adjustments of the RC Plus damper include 13 clicks of low-speed compression and 26 clicks of low-speed rebound to keep fine-tuning possible. The damper also has a bleed port at the top to help with blow-off under heavy bottom out, burping oil out into the lower legs. The lower legs also use oil for the first time, whereas previous models only required grease. Our Test Durolux in its 170mm travel and 44mm offset variant retails for a mere $849 and weighed in at 2,576 grams. This made the Durolux the cheapest fork in the test and the second heaviest behind DVO's Onyx 38. A big focus for SR Suntour has always been ease of maintenance, and the internal details of the latest Durolux 38 reflects that, but its capabilities were highly unknown among our group of test forks. So the question remained, is the Durolux more than just a cost-effective option that's easy to work on, and does it offer the performance to compete with other high-end and more expensive forks on the market?
Durolux, Duramax.
The Durolucky.
The Durolux 38 was an unexpected strong performer for me in the group. I've never ridden SR Suntour suspension, so I didn't have any preconceived notions coming into this, and this fork did a really good job balancing stability with comfort and control for me.
This fork felt super comfortable right off the bat, provides a ton of support and stability. I think through the heavier compressions, it didn't seem to dive too easily, and the small bump is still really good on it.
I didn't think it was going to be anything great, to be honest, because there's not that many adjustments, unlike, some of the other forks where there's just clickers everywhere. You would think that more clickers is more better, but sometimes you can get really lost in it. This fork was super easy to set up.
Setting up this fork is pretty straightforward. Going off the recommended setting, I couldn't really get sag where I wanted it, so I opened it up and pulled 2 of the 3 volume spacers out that came in it.
Overall, I just thought it was a fork that took little fussing with to get to a ride quality that was really lively, made for a fun ride down the trail, and had that good good mix of support and comfort.
Through larger undulations, it was really supportive, really stable. I think where I noticed the drawback from some of the higher end offerings perhaps, or you kind of get 80% of that small bump sensitivity through high speed chatter, like the high frequency braking bumps. I think by the end of the run, I just noticed a little bit more feedback in my hands. Speeding up rebound 1 click from where I started did help quite a bit with that, but it still was just maybe a touch off from where the upper end of the category fell. But the trade-off when looking at a fork like this is it is notably cheaper. I think this fork comes at around $800.
Yeah, that mix of having a really nice support to push against riding the bike park flow reader trails, it just stayed high in its travel. It was great to generate speed pumping through corners, a nice platform to push off of lips, and go through G-outs, and just carry good speed and not feel like you're cycling through the travel too much. Then the other end of that, through the rock gardens, really hectic sections with a lot of compressions happening, it did a good job of maintaining that consistent ride height. I preferred running it as open as I could to maximize the comfort in rock gardens, and then rely more on the air spring to give me that support and hold up.
It had all the bottom out support that you needed. It stayed pretty high up in the travel. So overall, I thought the SR Suntour was a great fork. I would not be mad if it was on my bike. I think a lot of people would be stoked with this fork on their bike.
Only thing that keeps this right behind the Zeb, the 38, or the Öhlins is it just doesn't have quite that smooth, easy on the hands feel like those forks do. It's still really comfortable, but if I am putting them head to head, this is still a little bit below that, just in that overall comfort. In our sea of 38mm single crown forks lies the Formula Belva with its prominent dual crowns and sleek 35mm stanchions. With a reputation for producing boutique, premium products in Italy, the Belva is built from the technology of Formula's surrounding forks and is littered with features and adjustments. Dual crown forks have mostly graced downhill bikes throughout the years because they provide the most fore and aft stiffness. However, modern enduro bikes have the geometry and ability to attack trails with the same tenacity as a downhill bike. The Belva is the product of this aha moment for Formula. They felt the current crop of enduro forks still lacked adequate stiffness and decided an enduro-optimized dual-crown chassis was the perfect solution to deliver a better handling and stable front end. The Belva uses beautifully crafted hollow-forged aluminum crowns, lightweight double-butted 35mm stanchions, and the same lowers as Formula's Selva all-mountain fork. Unlike most dual-crown downhill forks, the steer tube is tapered, not a straight 1 1/8. The only disadvantage Belva presents over its single-crown competitors is its limited turning radius. Our turning range varied between our 3 test bikes, but was less compared to the other forks. The Belva is only offered with a 43mm offset for 29-inch wheels and comes with 170 or 180mm of travel. We tested the 180mm version, which has an adjustable axle-to-crown height between 585 and 595mm, depending on how far you slide the stanchions in the crown. This is within a few millimeters of most single-crown forks of the same travel, allowing riders to easily toss on the Belva without significantly changing their ride height. It also offers another point of adjustability beyond bar rise and headset spacers. Final chassis details include post-mount tabs for 180mm rotors with compatibility up to 220mm and a 15mm through axle. Tunability is a common theme with Formula products, and the Belva delivers various points of adjustability. A drop-in cartridge damper features an external rebound knob, a low-speed compression knob, a lockout lever, and a threshold dial to adjust the lockout. Additionally, Formula offers its compression tuning system that allows riders to swap the compression valve assembly without having to open up the fork. The valve sits on top of the damper and takes only a few minutes to replace. A creative way to give riders a heightened level of custom tunability by completely altering the damping curve, Formula ships the fork with a lighter damped linear valve and a progressive valve. 6 additional valves are available aftermarket for those seeking specific damping characteristics. Unlike some of Formula's other forks that feature individually adjustable positive and negative air springs, the Belva offers only an adjustable positive air chamber combined with a triple coil negative spring. The 3 springs get stiffer as the fork approaches full extension to help counteract topping out while maintaining smooth off-the-top performance. The airspring piston also sits on a ball joint to help reduce friction during compressions caused by chassis flex. The spring curve can be adjusted via Formula's Neopose volume reducers. The compressible foam spacers achieve the same goal as typical plastic spacers, reducing the size of the positive air chamber to increase ending stroke support. However, because they shrink in size as the fork compresses, they create a more linear spring curve. This means that adding Neopose spacers increases mid-stroke support without causing an abrupt ramp-up in support towards bottom out. Impressively, Formula has managed to keep the Belva at a fighting weight, coming in at just 2,465 grams. Which, for reference, is only 20 grams heavier than Fox's 38. Depending on where you live, you can get your hands on the Belva through a few different avenues. Here in the US, distribution is handled through BTI, so you can order a fork through your local bike shop. The MSRP does sit at $1,949, making the Belva the most expensive fork in our test. Hands down the most unique fork in our test sessions, we were curious to see if the Belva would provide new levels of performance that would outweigh its distinct looks and higher price tag.
Oh, the Formula. The Formula fork.
They hate fat people in Italy.
Yeah, back in my day, all we rode was dual crowns. So Formula's Belva was probably the coolest fork I thought we had in the test just because it is so much different. I mean, having a dual crown setup with a bunch of single crown forks was pretty unique to hop on. It's hard to beat the mental confidence you gain just from looking down and having a direct mount stem and another crown on top of your steer tube. Kind of with that said, it comes with a price tag that is premium.
Taking a look at the Formula Belva, the setup was a little bit difficult right off the bat. I'm about 230 pounds and the max supported rider weight is 200. So With the max recommended pressure being 85, I decided to go a little bit over that to try to get the sag in a usable area, and then got creative with the CTS valves they provide, which is a really cool thing. Having those was super beneficial to kind of change the overall characteristics of the way the fork rode. Right off the bat, I decided, because I'm over the recommended weight, go ahead and try the e-bike one, and landed in a pretty happy place there.
There's only 30 PSI between a 110-pound rider and a 200-pound rider. So trying to like really dial in that PSI is going to be a little tricky, to be honest. The other thing is max PSI on this is 85. I weigh 190 and I was at 82.5 PSI already. So someone that is 190, 200, or even above, this fork might not be for you, unfortunately.
Looking at the fork and it being a dual crown setup, I initially thought getting on trail it would feel burly or feel stiffer, but honestly it felt really comparable to all the other single crown 38 mil chassis forks we rode. Rides like an enduro fork as they market it. As I got into my few runs and stuff, I did mess around with the external valve you can change. I went to the orange valve, which was just more compression support, kind of more so in your medium to high speed compressions. That helped this fork have way more support, especially on bike park trails, I thought. Just gave a good platform to push against, very similar to the SR Suntour, where carries good speed, you can generate speed out of corners, pumping, hitting jumps, all that stuff. Really fun in those situations. That valve kept the initial stroke and off the top really supple and really smooth, so it gave it good comfort on bike park braking bumps, just the chattery bumps between berms and jumps and all that stuff. Once I got into the rock gardens where there was just a lot more successive hits, I struggled to keep the fork calm and not dancing around as much as I wanted. I tried making the rebound quicker to help it recover more, and it helped a little, but then it took away from the ride quality that I wanted on the rest of the trails we were riding. With that said, there's a lot of valves and adjustments that you can make on this fork. So, looking at the graphs they provide, I could have put a firmer valve setting in basically to give it more control and support throughout. I think that would have helped. I think adding another one of their Neopose volume reducers that also compresses would have increased that support throughout.
Putting in through the Neopose spacers provided support in a way I didn't expect. It was a much more linear build and support than a spike, and I think they're super useful if you find yourself at the upper end of the weight range or you're just wanting the fork to feel more supported. And the climb switch sweep actually offers a bit of adjustment. You can kind of land somewhere in the full range of sweep to get a little bit more low speed out of the fork, so that worked pretty well for me. The dual crown chassis definitely inspired a bit of confidence. Having the 35 mil stanchions keep a bit of fore and aft flexed in there, so the fork was actually super comfortable over chatter and kind of the high speed braking bumps. Because the fork had such a light feeling though, I noticed my rear wheel kind of would skip out a bit, so if you're a heavier rider, this may not be the best option.
The turning radius on this was not the best. Out here in North Jersey, we have some pretty tight trails, and I don't know if this fork would do well out on the trail, but out here at the bike park, it worked really well. One of the downsides that I did not like about this fork was that it's a direct mount 160. So we had to get super creative to find the formula to make the brakes work on this. So we were running 220 rotors, and we have 60 mils of spacers. We had to double up on our adapters just to make this work and get super creative to run this fork throughout the test.
My kind of like overall impressions from riding the fork is that it costs more, it is more niche and unique, and the ride quality on trail, while it was great, wasn't a world of a difference compared to the other forks or traditional single crown forks that exist. I think that makes this fork a really cool option for somebody who looks at all the tunability it has on offer and finds that something really appealing and is okay with the price tag that it comes with. I mean, you really are riding a premium aftermarket fork with the Belva. The Vengeance 38 is the first 38mm single crown fork to come from XFusion. The all-new chassis includes some new tech inside and some refinements to existing features from previous models within the XFusion lineup. The Vengeance 38 boasts all-metal internals, a new fine-cut HLR damper, internally adjustable travel, and a number of features that place it among most other high-end offerings. Starting with the upper crown assembly, a tapered steer tube is pressed into a solid crown with a wide stance to create a rigid interface with the 38mm stanchions. Moving down the fork, the magnesium lowers have a clean look with purposeful bracing around the arch and dropouts to create a rigid interface between the wheel and the fork. A set of pressure relief ports are found just below low-friction wiper seals with set screws to release lower leg pressure, a feature that has been found on XFusion chassis for over a decade. A standard threaded 15mm through axle ties everything together, and a 180mm post-mount brake interface with a bolt-on hose guide round out the lower leg details. The fine-cut HLR cartridge damper is all new for XFusion, and the Vengeance 38 is among the first models to receive the new damper. The cartridge-style construction is unique in the way it utilizes the inner stanchion wall as part of its construction rather than a self-contained inner tube. The damper is a bled system with an overflow port for pressure blow-off at full bottom out to maintain and equalize pressure within the system. The HLR denotation indicates independently adjustable high and low speed compression as well as low speed rebound. On the spring side, the Vengeance 38 uses a cartridge air spring to reduce piston size and improve small bump performance. Another long-running feature of XFusion forks is found in the lower portion of the air spring, which allows for easy internal travel adjustment. A dual lock ring system houses travel-reducing spacers, allowing for 20mm of adjustment in 10mm increments. The upper portion of the air spring also allows for the use of volume spacers to fine-tune the spring curve. The Vengeance 38 is offered in 3 different colorways, black, tan, and a special dark blue to commemorate the 25th anniversary of XFusion. The fork will only be offered in one damper configuration, with travel options between 160 and 180mm, with support for 29-inch wheels only in either a 44mm or a 51mm offset. The Vengeance 38 tipped the scales at 2,461 grams, placing it around mid-pack for weight, and it retails at $1,000, making it the second cheapest fork in the test. With the strong presence in the OEM world for over 2 decades and all the knowledge and development that comes with it, we are curious to see what XFusion's latest high-end fork was going to ride like.
The Vegan 38, overall a decent fork. It was actually pretty easy to set up. It was one of the only forks that I kind of just set everything in the middle, and maybe I went 1 or 2 clicks each way just to test it, and overall, it was pretty solid fork, throughout the day.
It was an easy fork to get on and get up to a comfortable setup and ride at a comfortable pace. It's nice that you have a lot of adjustments on hand. You have high and low speed compression. The clicks that are on offer, I found that you had to go quite a few clicks to actually notice an adjustment. I did enjoy the fork with more compression damping than less, requiring or leaning more on that versus the air spring.
What stood out initially was the super light feeling on the trail. It had a tendency to mute a lot of trail feedback. Kind of made a lot of different size bumps disappear, but the trade-off was that you felt a little bit stuck in the travel. So I played around with air pressure to get it to sit higher, and then came back down in pressure a bit and ended up using some of the damping controls to kind of slow the velocities through the fork, since it was really light feeling.
This fork did a great job at maintaining a good ride height through the bike park berms. Anything where you're having to put your weight on the fork, gave you a good platform, a lot of support. Through the chattery bumps, like real high frequency braking bumps, or the flatter rock gardens where the fork is needing to flutter over things, it was great at that. It was really good. The second that compressions became medium to larger size, and in those rock gardens where bumps are coming from every direction, that's where this fork, I started to notice that the performance wasn't quite there. It just got a little bit more overwhelmed. Those successive hits, it couldn't quite recover as well as I wanted it to. Again, I kept going more in with high-speed compression, which helped calm things down, but it never quite got to where the Fox, the RockShox, the Ohlins were at.
I noticed right off the bat in the parking lot test that it had a little bit of top out. I didn't think I would notice it all that much out on the trail, but actually when you're lifting up and doing some gaps, you know, coming off of drops, stuff like that, you can actually feel that top out.
One drawback of it, I think, was the flex out of the chassis. I had the axle loosen up on the first couple runs, but after retorquing it, it stayed tight for the rest of the test. That chassis flex kind of became apparent under really hard successive hits. I felt like there was maybe a bit of binding in it, and it just kind of suffered where it was really good at taking away those bigger bumps. The small bumps kind of transmitted through my hands pretty heavily. So that was kind of the main drawback. It was pretty noisy, had a bit of knocking going on inside, and we pulled it apart to take a look. Everything was tight, so it just seems like it has a bit of a top out that is kind of unavoidable, but pretty comfortable overall. Just maybe a little less supportive than what I would have liked.
Overall, I think for the price, you get a really good fork with a nice 38 mil chassis that's a good mix of stiffness and compliance. The downside is that I think even with all adjustments on hand, it would be hard to take away some of that lack of confidence and comfort when things get really rowdy, as well as the feedback you're going to kind of always have through your hands. You could work it out, you probably could get somewhere, but there's going to be a compromise somewhere along the line. Well, it wouldn't be much of an enduro fork test without the wildly popular Fox 38. Launched back in 2020, the 38 helped write the blueprints for burly, long travel, single crown forks. The latest update to hit the 38 came earlier this year in the form of Fox's new Grip X2 damper and revised lower bushings. With increased levels of tunability in the same tried and true chassis, our anticipation was high to see if the 38 would continue to be a leader in the enduro fork segment. Many of the chassis features that we've come to understand from the 38 were quite novel when the fork first hit the market. Upper chassis highlights include a larger CSU with an elliptical steer tube to improve lateral and torsional stiffness, and a rounded arch that curves forward to clear larger head tubes and has methodical cutouts to minimize weight. The lower legs utilize bypass channels that increase the air volume of the lowers, creating less ramp up and a more linear feel. The channels also provide a pathway for oil to circulate the fork, lubricating the bushings and seals. On the outside of the lowers are bleeder valves that remove trapped air inside the fork and equalize it with outside atmospheric pressure. Other lower leg details include a 44mm offset, a 15mm floating axle, a 180mm brake mount that can fit up to a 230mm rotor, and mounts for a bolt-on mudguard that's sold separately. The 38 uses Fox Evol air spring that places the spring piston inside a floating air sleeve instead of sitting against the inside of the fork stanchions. The air sleeve can move slightly inside the stanchion, allowing the piston to function smoothly regardless of torsional load. The positive-negative chamber are connected via a transfer port that equalizes the pressure between them to improve initial stroke sensitivity. Riders can also install volume reducers in the positive chamber to create a more progressive spring curve. The Grip X2 damper replaces Fox's popular Grip 2 damper and maintains the same four-way external adjustments but offers a higher degree of compression tunability. It also has a faster response time, resulting in more control and traction when you're really getting after it on rowdy trails. The most significant change from Grip 2 to Grip X2 is that high-speed compression is no longer controlled by Fox's variable valve control system. VVC was a great way to create significant damping change with a small amount of movement within the damper. However, it also caused a loss of consistency across the range of adjustability. Ditching VVC in the high-speed compression circuit freed up room in the X2 damper to add a larger compression shim stack and base valve. Grip 2 had a 20mm base valve with 7 shims, while Grip X2 has a 24mm base valve with 23 shims. The additional shims allow the damper to better control oil velocity, creating a more consistent ramp in shim flex at various speeds. This results in consistent damping throughout travel, a more sensitive initial stroke, and good support without feeling harsh. The range of tunability is also more usable, and the change between clicks is more noticeable than before. Now, open still offers some damping, while closed is not completely shut off, making either desirable in the right terrain. Grip X2 marks a significant change in the tuning ideology of Fox's dampers, which have generally been more air spring dependent than damper dependent. Riders should now expect to ride with fewer volume spacers, a proper amount of pressure to achieve normal sag, and more compression damping to achieve a calm, controlled, supportive ride. Beyond all the new damper goodness, the only other update for 2025 forks is lower friction bushings, which, thanks to their grooveless design, retain a more even coat of oil. For 27 5-inch wheels, the 38 comes with 170 millimeters of travel, while 29-inch forks come in 160, 170, and 180 millimeters. We tested the shiny black colorway with 170 millimeters of travel that retails for $1,250 and weighed in at 2,446 grams. This made the Fox 38 the third lightest and third most expensive fork in the test. The 38 was the one fork in the test we had all ridden extensively over the years. However, we had minimal time aboard the new X2 damper, which turned out to significantly impact the performance of a fork we thought we all had figured out. Alrighty, Fox's 38, the old faithful in the Enduro fork category. It's a fork I've ridden a ton over the years, and I've always been a fan of it. I like how definitive and precise the chassis feels.
I feel like they really built this fork for the rude trails. It really holds up in deep compressions. It's super stiff, but yet it's supple in its own way.
The standout trait of this fork was just stability overall. I think the small bump compliance is really, really good, and the range of tuning options is better than a lot of forks on the market in terms of external adjustments.
It was really cool for me the first day to ride this back-to-back with RockShox Zeb, and kind of learn that the feel of this chassis is a little bit stiffer, maybe lacks a little bit of comfort compared to the Zeb, but still really good, still great for an enduro application.
Going off of Fox's recommended setup, it was super comfortable, but maybe a little vague, and having the ability to kind of change the overall behavior of the fork so rapidly is really convenient. I think in terms of tunability, it's a fork that really anyone can find a happy spot on.
So you have volume spacers, you have high speed, low speed compression, high speed and low speed rebound. It might take you a little bit longer to dial this fork in, but I think once you do, you're going to be rewarded nicely.
I'm a huge fan of this damper. It gives you so much more compression support and hold up, and you actually can use the compression adjustments without ending up with a harsh ride feel. This fork is great because you have so many different levels of adjustability. And for that reason, I scored this a 10 for tunability. When I think about my time this week riding a 38, I think the words that come to mind are calm, planted, and composed. It's just a fork that, especially when you get like the really rough stuff, you're not having to think or question what it's doing and how it's performing. It can be so calm and planted, and at the same time, it's not lethargic. If you want to be responsive, there's a lot to push against. You can, without having to maybe pick like some of the other forks, what ride quality you're going for, I think you can achieve like a really nice, well-rounded, high-performing setup, whether that's support, comfort, traction, responsiveness. You can get all of those feelings. And I think kind of like the one other thing that does stand out about the 38, and this is shared, I thought, with the Öhlins and the Zeb, is that the speed at which the fork can transition between compression damping and then recovering and getting into that rebound damping is really fast. Like it just keeps the fork working really quickly and makes for that calm ride where some of the other forks would almost feel like they were packing or just getting overwhelmed, and you start to, instead of being able to look ahead and focus on what's coming up, you're starting to feel a lot of what's happening. 38 and the X2 and the airspring they have in there keeps up really well with the trail, especially when it gets rough. This fork, the Zeb, and the Öhlins RX F38 are all like on a very equal playing field to me. Like I'm having to really split hairs between which one does what better, but I think depending on what you're after, you can make each of those three forks cater to your needs. For the 38, tunability was a standout thing that it did super well. I would say that comfort was the one that it was maybe lacking a little bit, and I just chalked that up to the stiffness of the chassis. Right up there in popularity with Fox's 38 is RockShox Zeb fork. Zeb was designed to take the abuse of the most demanding terrain by maximizing torsional stiffness and small bump sensitivity for a balanced ride experience. We tested the latest Zeb Ultimate, and while it might not look that much different than before, there is more going on than just a shiny new red colorway. Most notably a new damper and bushings that have a significant impact on performance and tuning. The Zeb is the first 38mm stanchion fork from RockShox and is reminiscent of the Totem model from years past, but with a whole lot more bump-eating tech packed inside. The upper portion of the chassis features a tapered steer tube butted into a machined crown that shaves as much weight as possible and gives the Zeb a premium look without sacrificing stiffness. The lower legs represent all that RockShox has learned over the past decade of development in enduro racing and long-travel single-crown performance. Pressure relief valves are found on the backside of the lower legs, and a dial-style plug is used to operate them. Above those sit a set of SKF dust wiper seals to minimize friction. Around the axle are torque cap compatible dropouts for oversized hub end caps to maximize stiffness at the hub interface. There are also bolt-in placeholders included for use with regular hubs. Other lower leg details include a 200mm post-mount brake interface, a Maxell 15mm through axle, and an offset arch to help clear larger head tubes as well as bolt-on fender mounts. RockShox is always chasing friction reduction and small bump sensitivity, most of which can be attributed to the Debonair Plus air spring found inside the Zeb. The piston runs along the inner wall of the upper tube, and RockShox utilizes a more rigid construction of the internal air spring components to maintain smooth action regardless of forces transmitted through the external chassis. This helps avoid friction normally associated with this style of air spring. A larger air volume helps build support naturally throughout travel, and volume can be adjusted through the use of the bottomless tokens provided with the fork. Taking small bump absorption even further, two rubber pucks found at the bottom of the air shaft and damper assemblies, referred to as buttercups, soak up trail chatter before the air spring even begins to move. The newly released Charger 3.1 damper is now found across Ultimate and Select Plus level forks within the RockShox lineup. This revision creates a larger range of damping force within the same range of adjustment. The compression circuit has been reworked to help oil flow more freely when open for decreased damping support and to be more restrictive when closed for increased damping support, meaning each click will result in a greater damping effect than before. While the 3.1 update is quite new, the best attributes of the original Charger 3 still remain. There are still 5 clicks of high-speed compression, 10 clicks of low-speed compression, and 20 clicks of rebound adjustment with the same intuitive user interface to coincide with the rest of RockShox forks and shocks. These adjustments are designed to eliminate any crossover from one to the next, meaning one damping effect should have no effect on another to allow for the most precise setup possible. The final update to the newest generation of Zeb chassis is the switch to a set of low-friction bushings in the lower legs that are said to help capture oil better and provide more consistent lubrication. The Zeb Ultimate is available for 27.5 and 29-inch wheels with corresponding 38 or 44mm offset. Our 29-inch 170mm test fork weighed in at 2,389 grams, making it the second lightest fork in the test and retailed for $1,160, landing it right in the middle of the group for price. While some of us had ridden the Zeb more in the past than others, none of us had yet to spend any time on the latest Charger 3.1 damper. But as we got into testing, these changes proved to be highly effective and the results spoke for themselves.
It's red. It means it's fast.
RockShox Zeb, another big player in the Enduro fork category. Personally, I think this fork looks great. I think it's the best looking fork out of the group. I think that should be something people consider when they're looking at buying an aftermarket fork. Things that stand out about the Zeb is definitely comfort. This was the most comfortable fork out of the group by a little bit of a margin, I thought. That comfort was all across the board. High frequency chatter bumps, braking bumps on bike park trails, getting into all the rocks and all the chunder sections. Like, you don't feel hardly any of the feedback through your hands and your arms, and it's really impressive what they've been able to create with just the damper, the air spring, the chassis, like the whole fork itself.
This is a fork I've ridden a lot in the last few years and had to set up a little bit differently for the conditions here. Yeah, with the changes they've made to the high-speed compression circuit, going to a slightly more open setup than what I would run at home, I definitely noticed the changes they made. It seemed to perform a lot better in those successive hits, and for me, this fork was kind of a standout in the group for performance over successive hits.
Similar to the Fox 38 and the Öhlins RFX 38, the composure and stability and being planted those are like the key words of all these three forks. And the Zeb was right up there with those two forks to me. Like, I would have a really hard time picking personally which out of the three does any of those better.
For one, it's dead silent, which is, always great to have a quiet bike. And at the same time, it just never seemed to skip a beat. It was the most comfortable fork in the test, I think, overall. And it felt the most controlled in really high-speed situations. That was a lot to do with the air spring sensitivity, the flow of oil in the damper, the buttercups in the lower leg. These things all add up to make it a really calm experience to ride at a high speed.
I really enjoy how they do their compression adjustments and how it's so easy to visually see the changes you're making. And now you don't have maybe as many clicks as some of the other forks, which I think is a good thing. Every click makes a difference. It's so efficient to get to a setup that you're looking for. And it's also really easy to bracket when you're getting the fork and go to one end and see what that feels like and go to the other end. And there's not all this space in between to kind of question if one click's better than the other.
In the gnarlier terrain, like hitting bigger compressions, it stays really composed and you can kind of find either end of the spectrum. There was a few runs where I had it a little too stiff with the settings I would run, back home in Northern California, and it didn't really work here, but having the option to open it up on trail so easily and not have to count how many clicks you are from closed or open. I think the standout characteristic was just comfort across all the terrain types that we tested. It was awesome on the small chatter, and it was equally as impressive in the really heavy compressions on the rockier trails.
Overall, I think it was an amazing fork. It's stiff, it's agile, super poppy, playful, but yet it's there for you when you get in trouble.
With how calm this fork is, it allowed me to go into those gnarlier sections, and when you're feeling less of the bumps, you're able to focus a bit more on what's coming at you. It's the same as like riding a quiet bike. When there's just less outside commotion happening, it was easier to ride my bike and just know that the fork was going to be there doing what it was doing. Comfort scored the highest out of that. I would say that traction was one of the best out of the group. Tunability scored very well because it's so easy to just visually see the adjustments you're making. And for all those reasons, like, the Zeb was the highest scoring fork for me in the test. The only reason I didn't pick this as the fork that I would like to take home from this group test was that comfort and that soak up every little compression and the buttercups doing their thing with high frequency bumps made it feel a little vague sometimes with what was happening with my front end and my front wheel. That vagueness it didn't take away from the ride quality, but maybe I'm somebody who has grown up with forks that tell you a little bit more of what's going on, and that is like the ride quality I'm after. This almost muted so much of the trail that sometimes I was looking to know more of what was happening. It's definitely more of a personal thing. I think that this fork with the tuning you have on offer would be epic for racing if you were going that route, or if you're coming to Mountain Creek like we've done the last week, and you're riding like really rough, chattery stuff during summer. Perfect for that. Like, your hands are going to be nice and comfy, not a lot of arm pump. RockShox Zeb. To finish things off, we have Öhlins RFX 38 M.2. Created to provide the same level of performance as their World Cup winning DH38 dual crown fork, the RFX 38 was built to meet the demands of enduro racing. Now in its second generation, it was designed from the ground up for optimized single crown performance. The RFX 38 chassis was fine-tuned to achieve a flex profile that blends comfort and control. The control part of the equation starts with the upper crown assembly, which consists of a tapered steer tube, solid crown, and 38mm stanchions. Matching this control with a favorable level of comfort comes from methodically constructed lower legs, which house a set of low-friction dust wipers. A 15mm floating axle is found at the dropouts, and a 200mm post-mount brake interface sits just above it. While the Öhlins setup relies more heavily on the damper than the air spring is pretty unique in itself. The 3-chamber system uses a cartridge-style design, eliminating the need for volume reducers. It consists of a standard positive chamber, negative chamber, and ramp-up chamber found at the bottom of the fork. The main chamber up top dictates the overall spring curve of the fork through standard air pressure adjustment to control the overall fork feel. Within the main chamber is a negative chamber, which can be tuned with spacers to control the initial breakaway force and feeling at the beginning of the travel. Lastly, the ramp-up chamber provides bottom-out support towards the end of travel independent of the main chamber. This separation is made possible through the use of a small piston housed within the lower half of the air shaft assembly, which provides bottom-out support at the second half of travel without affecting small bump sensitivity early in the stroke. The TTX 18 damper inside the RXF 38 gets its name from the twin-tube design and an 18mm diameter main piston. The piston was 22mm in the first generation, but was sized down to help improve sensitivity across bumps of all sizes and speeds. The TTX 18 damper provides external low and high-speed compression adjustments and a single low-speed rebound adjustment. While these are standard adjustments found across most dampers on the market, the clicks are more limited than most. High-speed compression has only 3 positions, while low-speed compression and rebound have a wider range at 15 clicks. Öhlins does this to prevent things from getting too far from a recommended setup and instead suggests having the shim stack revalved if a different damping characteristic is desired. We tested the RXF 38 with 170mm of travel and a 44mm offset. While a fancy limited team edition fork is available with shiny yellow lowers, the subtle satin black colorway we received looked to be all business. The fork retails for $1,395, making it the second most expensive fork in the test behind Formula's Belva. However, the fork also only tips the scales at just 2,320 grams, making it the lightest in the lineup. While the RXF 38 hasn't undergone any major updates recently, the tech that it provides is unique among the group. Our overseas tech guru Johan has spent extensive time aboard Öhlins forks and has always given them glowing praise. So we are excited to see how our stateside crew would fare with the Swedish brand's top-tier fork.
How would Johan say the name of this fork?
Oh, it's the Öhlins?
I don't even want to try. Öhlins?
Take a look at the Öhlins RXF 38 M.2. The best way I could describe this fork on trail is like a bubble you can't pop over bumps. It kind of seems to just slip over some of the nastiest compressions.
The hype was definitely real. Can't confirm that, as it delivered such a calm and controlled ride quality, especially the harder I rode and the more energy that I drove through the fork. It sounds cliche, but to me this was the fork in the test that there was kind of no end to how hard I could ride it, and it's like the bigger the impact or the harder I was arriving at bottom out, the more control it provided.
I personally thought it was one of the easier ones to set up. Having that lower chamber made dialing in the fork super easy.
The external adjustments I think are super useful. The last position of the high-speed knob is a lockout, which isn't my favorite, but of the 3 usable positions, you get a really big change between them, which is pretty helpful for making changes rapidly on trail. What you lack in terms of damper adjustability, you gain in air spring adjustability with the ramp-up chamber. The initial setup felt really soft on this fork, and I found myself looking for more high-speed compression damping, but using the ramp-up chamber, I kind of discovered that it doesn't change your overall spring curve as much as you would think. Instead, the support comes in late in the travel rather than spiking early when you're hitting things fast, and the fork maintains excellent traction through successive larger hits.
A lot of the other forks, we had to like really bump up the air pressure and the PSI in the chambers. This one was pretty spot on.
With so much talk about how these forks not like rely on compression damping, but provide more of it, I was still able to ride with the fork fairly open and rely on their 2-chamber system to get all of that support. And what I thought was so cool about that is that you get all the support you want with none of the harshness or spiking or like crazy ramp up that people maybe associate with generally how we use air springs, it seems. That ramp up chamber works incredibly well, and it keeps the fork riding high in its travel, but it more keeps the fork in like your mid-stroke, but doesn't keep it from reaching bottom out when it needs to.
Over the high-speed chatter, I feel like you maybe lose a little bit of comfort that the Fox and RockShox forks have, but in the gnarliest terrain, it just flutters over bumps, and it feels like you have support to push into basically everywhere. Yeah, there's a pretty seamless transition between compression and rebound that kind of never skips a beat, and being able to adjust that ramp up chamber really helps with where that support will kind of come into play. Yeah, it's got a really comfortable chassis. It didn't feel overbearing on my hands, but that small bump sensitivity was maybe a little bit less than what the other forks offered. The trade-off is that you get a ton of additional support in the gnarliest stuff.
I thought that it recovered super well through the kind of flatter, smaller rock gardens that we rode. And then as those rock gardens got to be a lot deeper and harsher compressions, that just like speed at which the fork could keep up with impacts that was happening was awesome. It was incredible. Like, it allowed me to not have to think as much about what was happening, knowing that, you know, I could ride the fork as aggressively I want, and it would match that with control and support. Even though this maybe wasn't as smooth right off the top, I think that is just maybe sort of the nature of how this fork rode, because I wasn't having to set up the fork to get that support that I love so much, and it was taking away from the comfort. I think that that's just sort of how this fork is, and I was okay with it because it never hindered traction. I still found on, say, like a flat corner with a little bit of chatter, settles into its travel well. It gives you that grip that you want. So all that talk about support and stability, I gave this the highest score out of the group for that category. Overall, it wasn't the highest scoring fork, but in all the other categories we looked at, it was either second or third with the Zeb and the 38. But this was my favorite fork on the test, purely because I think there's still so much I can get out of it with maybe a little bit more tuning, but more so from the standpoint that the harder I rode it, the more aggressive I rode it, the more it was willing to provide that support, kind of be up for the challenge mentality. And for the way I like to ride, coming from a racing background, I want to be able to smash stuff really hard. I'm not looking for like the most playful, lively setup. I think that fit exactly what I was looking for. To pick a winner out of any of these contradicts how much we liked the other ones regardless.
But how are you gonna?
I'm gonna take this one.
So after 4 days of testing, my pick is the RockShox Zeb. I like a really supple fork, but also have that bottom out support that you really need in some of the deeper compressions. It was a really tight call between the Zeb and the Fox 38. Maybe I should have gone with the 38, but I think that there's a lot of potential with the Zeb that I haven't found yet, and I want to pair the Zeb with the new Vivid coil, which I think is going to be awesome. I'm excited to give it a go and put it on my bike and ride it for some time.
Yeah, so of everything we read this week, there was a few that stood out. Obviously, the top three were the Fox, RockShox, and Öhlins, and they all were great for different reasons, but I think for what I look for out of bike setup and the way that I ride, the Öhlins was my favorite of those three. The RockShox was super comfortable, but the Öhlins kind of, where you sacrifice that comfort, I felt like you gained it back at the ragged edge where you're kind of riding the most aggressive stuff. Yeah, it was pretty difficult to choose between the two. The Zeb has a really intuitive feeling that is easy to set up and kind of achieve what you're looking for, where the Öhlins takes a bit more back and forth, but I think where I ended up, I was happier with overall for the different terrain types that I ride on a regular basis. With the damper adjustments available, I'll be curious to see if those change throughout the year, or if playing with some valving options maybe gets it even better than it is now, but it's definitely something I want to pursue, kind of exploring all the options with. So I'll be keeping it on my bike for the remainder of the tests and for the year.
So out of all the forks we tested this week, I picked the Öhlins RX F38 as my favorite in the group. And that is because I think it's a fork that I didn't quite reach the limit of the support and stability and control that it can offer. I think it's a fork that I look forward to taking more places and really finding out kind of where its limits exist. And I think it matches my background from racing downhill really well. It has all that support, it has all that control, and it's really consistent. And yeah, I'm stoked on it. Well, that concludes our Enduro fork test sessions. It was really cool to see the level of performance available from every brand and how it really just came down to little nuances separating each fork, which I think is great for you, the rider. It allows you to pick a fork that caters to what you prioritize. Thank you so much for watching and supporting independent mountain bike media. A big shout out to Mountain Creek, Feedback Sports, and Ride Rat for supporting this test. And make sure to head to vitalmtb.com to read our full in-depth review of each fork.